Today's live show is sponsored by Uffizzi. Stand up your developer platform in minutes with Uffizzi. The Uffizzi platform provides fast provision Kubernetes clusters for all your dev and testing needs. Every engineer gets self-service, sandboxed virtual clusters. Every team can have centralized management of those clusters. It runs on their infrastructure or yours. Uffizzi has deployment support for Helm, Kustomize, Kubernetes Manifest, and even Docker Compose. Their management platform has features such as sleep mode, time-based deletion, and resource quotas for avoiding overspending. Try their free starter tier today by spinning up your first sandbox cluster in under a minute at uffizzi.com. Hello, my internet friends. I'm Bret. Welcome to my channel. This is a stream week where it's just Q&A or things I want to talk about. Sadly, Nirmal isn't here, my wonderful co-host. I don't have any guests this week, but if you're live, or even if you're not, and you're watching this within the week of broadcast of stream, then just so you know, next week, gonna be at a retreat, so planning on releasing a premiere video, which means I'm not live, but I will be in chat and I'll come up with something. I've got some ideas. We're gonna have a video. Week after that, I'm gonna be at KubeCon. If the internet gods allow it, I will be streaming from KubeCon, hopefully with Nirmal. Yay. After that, we're gonna have the CEO of Dagger. You may know him as the founder of Docker. Solomon Hykes is going to be here. We're going to dive into what is Dagger. I've deliberately not had them on the show, although I've been watching and checking out their product for years. A lot of people have asked me about Dagger, and I kind of wanted to let them get their wings and sort of figure out what they wanted to be as a company, because they were iterating on ideas. And, you know, I'd like something on this channel to be good in 6 months and to still make sense. So I've been excited to watch them this year. I'm going to talk to the team at KubeCon. Thanks, Dagger team. They're inviting us to a dinner. And at the same time, I was talking to my friend Marcos, who's also a Docker captain, who also works at Dagger. And we were chatting about when they should be on the show, who would be on the show, and Solomon volunteered. So it's going to be great to see him again. I'm excited for that one. So next week, surprise, week after KubeCon, week after Dagger, then it's Thanksgiving here in the United States. That will be another one of these where it's just me hanging out with you. And then, let's see, we're going to have an end of year special show with guests, like a guest panel in December, as we do each year, which is our tradition. And that's the plan for the rest of the year. There's a lot of other stuff in between, some guests that I'm going to have to find at KubeCon. If you're going to be at KubeCon, by the way, you should find me. You should tell us all in the Discord server. So if you didn't know, there's a little Discord server right there. It's only 16,000 people in it. That is over here. So I can just show you what it looks like to prove that it's not a figment of my imagination. So we're in here every day. I mean, I'm in here more than I'm on Twitter now. This is the community. And these are all DevOps people. So if you're watching this show, check it out. Discord server for DevOps. You can actually go to devops.fan right above. Let's jump in. And tomorrow, Friday, the 27th, if you're a Docker Swarm fan, we have our bi-monthly Docker Swarm fans meetup right here. So this is your calendar of to-dos once you get in the Discord server. And I hope to do more things here, but we have a monthly high fiver in case you want to be a supporter of me in this channel and this community. You can be a member here on YouTube and get access. You can be a member over on my website. You can be a member on Patreon, wherever you want to be a member. If you become a $5 US dollar, I think it's 5, maybe it's 6 now. If you become a high fiver, whatever that turns into in your currency and in your side of the world, the Swarm Fans Meetup. So buy me a coffee, and that's just basically a quality filter. We have a great group of people that show up there every month, and we'd like to grow that group. So we talk about the projects we're working on. We ask for feedback on, stuff we're working on. I honestly thought about turning this into maybe a study group, but there's already so many of those, and I wouldn't want Docker 101 questions to be dominating what I think is a really great group of real DevOps engineers working day to day in DevOps, just talking about their projects and talking about their struggles. So I'm thinking of something like a study group. We already have, by the way, Eric, who's in chat, is partly in co-hosting. I'm not sure if hosting, and if you're in charge, I don't know your role actually, of a study group. So Eric, throw in a link to the Kubernetes study group. I think it's a Kubernetes, or is it just DevOps? Anyway, once you see that, you can tell people about that. All right. What else? This turns into a podcast. Not this episode, but all the more interesting episodes, all the ones with the guests that I learned from. That turns into a podcast. You can go to podcast.bretfisher.com. There's links below. And something new is happening. It's starting today or yesterday, technically. I'm starting to put more effort into shipping regular YouTube videos on just whatever I want to monologue on, whatever I want to teach, whenever I want to show off, whatever I want to talk about. This week was DockerCon 2023 announcements. And if you didn't know, there's also a newsletter. So there's one thing you do after this show when you're done with your Discord is you sign up for the newsletter. And the reason you sign up for the newsletter is you know who's going to be on the show every week. You know who's on the podcast that was just released. You know when I release anything else in a course or major updates or a new GitHub repo with examples or a new YouTube video. You can check all that stuff out. This last week's, by the way, was this talking about Docker file front ends. You can get all this, by the way, over at bret.news. So let me give you that link. So that's a link to the newsletter. That's the one way to keep relevant, or keep up to date, I should say, of all the content I'm creating in this community without having to stare at my social feeds. I'm basically saving you from staring at X or my LinkedIn or whatever. So I appreciate you following me there, but this is supposed to make it easier. Last week's was about the Docker file front ends. If you're not using them, if you didn't know, I'm convinced this is now going into every Docker file I ever make. It's been years in the making, and they had to win me over with a lot of, committing to new features that if you didn't even know, the Docker file has a version now, essentially, and it's changing, and we're getting new stuff every year. So I go through some of my favorites in here, some of my favorite new features, why I put this stuff in my Docker file. You can even see I broke down versions and what their major things were over the last 3-4 years. Anyway, you should totally get on that newsletter. But the week before, the week before that, oh my goodness, I did a DockerCon 2023 announcements post/newsletter. And this post specifically goes through each of the major announcements at DockerCon, and then I'm keeping this up to date. I'm trying to revise it as things change, or as Docker releases a link for you to sign up for something, regarding one of these little tools. And that is coming out. So that's new. That's technically the newsletter 34 or whatever, but I'm keeping all up to date. So I made a video about it over here on YouTube at bret.live. This is a little meta, but on this channel, released a video yesterday right here, all about DockerCon and the major things you need to care about that happened there. And then that's turning into a podcast episode. So you can see the content wheels a-turning. And so over here on the newsletter, sorry, not the newsletter. I already talked about the newsletter. Let's go to the podcast. On the podcast, I'm going to start shipping this quarter. Our plan is to start shipping double the episodes. Double the episodes. And so we're going to alternate between guests on the show, if you didn't know, guests that show up here every other week get edited down into an audio-only podcast. It's here on the podcast. If you didn't know about that podcast, I will also put that link in chat. And that's what's going on with me. Doubling up on the podcast, doing more YouTubes, course updates on the way. I fired all my clients. No more clients this year. Just content for you. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, everyone. Eric, glad you're back. Glad you're back. Going to see you at KubeCon. So if you're going to be at KubeCon, if you know someone who's going to be at KubeCon and you want to do a selfie, sort of like have someone else do a selfie for you, and then you can Gen AI your face over top of theirs maybe a little bit. We tend to meet up at KubeCon. So we actually have a conference group over in the chat. So come with us over there if you're lucky enough to be going to Chicago. And if we jump over here, we have a channel. And who am I hanging out with in KubeCon? I should get. So you can come hang out with us. We had a great group photo last year at KubeCon. It was like 5 of us. It was pretty fun. I love it. I love it. I feel like I've made friends over the internet, which is always an amazing feat. And to meet them in the real world so that we know that they're not robots. That's also amazing. New subscriber. Nyal, sorry if I mispronounced that. Welcome. Thanks for being a new sub. XOXO wants to talk about Docker Compose, maybe? Docker Swarm versus Kubernetes. Are you throwing me all the topics that we always talk about? Because those are good topics. People ask about those a lot. The Docker merger with Udemy. There is not a Docker merger with Udemy. Maybe you mean partnership. All that really means is Docker courses that Docker blesses on Udemy are going to somehow be listed somewhere, or there's going to be some indicator that these are approved Docker courses. And then they're going to probably help us content creators with where the gaps are, what they're going to make. We haven't really figured out what it's going to be yet, but it's good. It's good for me. It's going to be more work for me, but I'm sure it's going to be good. Good for you, the customer of Udemy, and good for people wanting to learn Docker, all the latest stuff. Yes, Eric agrees that High Fivers is awesome. So sign up now. You can even just try it for a month and cancel. We're not going to get offended if you hang out for a month and you didn't feel like it was worth the $5. But if you join to be a High Fiver member on this channel, then it'll automatically link in your YouTube settings. It'll link your Discord so that you'll get the special role in Discord and have access to exclusive channels and a monthly meetup on Discord. Check it out. Conrad's back, a regular, and then Maz is here. Welcome, Maz. Glad to see you. All right. Some things I'm working on. So you know the rules. If you're hanging out here today, you get to ask me questions, cloud native, Docker questions, whatever you feel like, technology questions, what the flavor of my coffee is, which is coffee flavor. And we can get into it. I don't really do demos that much anymore, but I'm happy to do that. I'm also excited because I got a new teleprompter on the way. I don't buy a lot of gear. If you actually looked at this set, it is not as fancy as you might think. I see sets where they're just like things are hanging from the ceiling and they've got sound panels everywhere. And I have some of that, but it's pretty basic. I keep it small and slim because this show is going on the road. I go to KubeCon, DockerCon. When I'm in an Airbnb at Civo Navigate this year in Tampa Bay, Florida, I did a mobile live stream. And the crazy thing is that the iPhone continuity camera, if you're on a Mac, is wicked good and actually serves as my new portable camera. So I don't even have to take a camera kit and deal with all the HDMI conversion. I don't have to do any of that on the road. It's just wirelessly allowing me to put an iPhone on a tripod, and it just acts like a webcam. It's a little easy compared to the entire separate bag of gear I have to take with me. Lights, all that stuff isn't really necessary anymore. Which one is OS good for production cluster? Sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name, so I'm just going to say Kumar. Hey, Kumar, what's up? I use Ubuntu. I think Ubuntu is the right mix of enterprise, internet popularity, universal availability on every major, ARM, AMD, ARM v7. Like, it can do it everywhere. And really, if you go out and you search for things, like let's say you have a problem with an OS in Linux, Ubuntu is really like the number one. I mean, if you search for problems on Stack Overflow, you're going to find answers, and they're most likely going to be on Ubuntu. So that's me. That's a good question. A lot of people go, if you're Red Hat, that's fine, but then you're going to be paying, right? Because if I'm going to go through all the pain and suffering of an enterprise OS on the Yum side of things, from on the Red Hat side, I'm probably going to want to pay someone to maintain and deal with issues, and some reason, some advantage to it, because I feel like it's always more work and there's always more issues long term with containers and stuff. That's just my experience in the last decade. But I don't see a lot of people using Debian. People on AWS use the Amazon Linux a lot. I've just never liked it. I've never I always felt like it was just off, and it was just a little bit different, and there was a few extra issues that I didn't have on a Debian-based OS. Now, for a desktop locally, if I was going to use Linux, I'd probably use Mint, Cinnamon Mint, but I don't even think, the last I checked, I'm not sure if they have an ARM release yet. They might have an ARM, but I tried to run it as a VM on my Mac, and Mint Cinnamon didn't have a release of that. But everybody else should be throwing their opinions in chat, because I just have opinions. These are not necessarily good decisions for you. These are not exactly the right answer for you. These are just the way I do things. So, back in Discord, well, we've got a couple people there. So we're going to have a group picture, I'm sure, at some point, like last year. I feel like there was, if we scroll back a year, there was probably a group photo. Here we go. I don't think everyone was in that photo, but that was us last year. Looking forward to seeing everyone there again, if you can make it. It's going to be cold. It's going to be cold. It's November in Chicago. Of course it's going to be cold. SciTech wants to know about Docker licensing. That is an important but not riveting topic. But let's get into it. Oh, by the way, did you know we had a loot store? You probably see little links here in YouTube if I'm doing my job right. But right now there's a 25% off everything. Now, overseas can kind of suck. I agree. If you're not in North America, the cost of shipping and taxes and stuff is kind of sucks. Sorry that I can't ship it to every country in the world. But 25% off right now. And we're actually, I don't know, I think my plan for next year, we're going to add a few more designs, and we're going to try a different t-shirt. So if you've ordered the t-shirts before, I'll just be honest. The t-shirt quality on the white ones isn't great. The t-shirt's great. The ink is not. So right now, I have friends who have bought the sneaker net, because that's my favorite. And for some reason, the white ink in this company, I'm not doing a very good job of selling my merch, but I'll be honest. These other logos, they all work great. For some reason, the black on white or whatever, it's the way they do their inking process. The white ones just don't work. Anyway, pricing. So Docker pricing is just a simple subscription, well, until DockerCon this year when they release Scout. Scout's a separate subscription. That's a security thing related to Docker, but not required. So Docker, you don't have to buy Docker unless you're in an enterprise making at either 10 million or more, I believe, a year, or I don't know, there might be a staffing number on that requirement. But if you're learning Docker, if you're watching this, taking my courses, learning Docker, in any organization, you're legally allowed to use it. What changes is you're not allowed to use it in large organizations if you make a certain amount of money or have a certain amount of people, I think. Someone's probably going to quote me on exactly what those numbers are. But that requires that you get a license if you're using it for the company's business to help the company's software run stuff on their servers. But if you're learning it and you're just exploring it, testing it, trying it out, the license specifically allows you to do that. And that was actually one of their design changes in that was they wanted to make sure us course creators had a legal way for you to use their software. And that's only if you need Docker Desktop or if you want a bunch of private repositories on Docker Hub. If you just want to use Docker on Linux, that's completely open source. Everything that's been open source at Docker has stayed open source. They have, to my knowledge, never taken an open source product that I remember using. They've never taken one and changed its license to be private or some sort of cost factor on it. So if you're on Linux, you can use it by default. If you want to use Docker Desktop and you're in an enterprise doing it for business, doing it for work at that company, not for personal use, which you can also use it personally for free. But yeah, if you're at one of those big companies, then you're going to have to pay. There's also other options. If you want to run Docker locally, you don't have to run Docker Desktop. We now have other options. Rancher Desktop is probably my second favorite. There are other command line options. There are things like Podman, which are not really Docker. But I have a list. Did you know that? I've probably talked about this. I haven't talked about this list in a while. So it's my list of Docker Desktop alternatives. So if you're in a large company and you don't want to pay the licensing fee for Docker if you're forced to do it, here is a spreadsheet. And there's probably a few that are not on here. OrbStack is now on here, and I probably don't have every OrbStack feature. You can make comments on this spreadsheet for things you know to be true or false that I don't have marked because I'm not an expert in every option. But this is basically all the ways you can run containers locally on your machine. That's all the ways I know of. And the community helps me with this by suggesting new changes. So if you know about something or if you want to add some information, a lot of these have comments on them about why that feature works or what maybe causes that feature to not work. And this isn't just features. This is platform compatibility. This is, does it also run Kubernetes as well as Docker? Can you run multi-node? Does it support bind mounts of your code? Does it support compose? Does it have built-in CVE scanners? Does it support GPUs? There's just a lot. There's a lot of factors when it comes to running containers for all your stuff locally. And so check out that spreadsheet. So hopefully I answered your questions, SciTech. If not, let me know in the chat. Y'all has a question on continuous deployment using Argo CD. How can I automate it using command lines? And the issue is it limits pod logs to only 100 lines per page. Continuous deployments on Argo CD. How can I automate it using command lines? And the issue is it limits pod logs to only 100 lines per page. So I'm not sure about the pod log. I guess maybe what you're saying is that you're using Argo commands to get pod logs. And in that case, if you're just doing it from the command line, then use kubectl. Use what's the log tool? can't remember the name of it. That's why I have you all in chat, because my brain goes dumb. Is dumb. But kubectl. Use kubectl for logs. I mean, it's using a different API than the Argo CD, which is technically talking to the Argo CD, but that's what I would do. I don't know anything about pod limits because I've literally never looked at pod logs through the Argo CD tool. So sorry, I can't help you with that. On automating Argo CD through the command lines, how do you do that? I don't recommend that method. I mean, if I'm going to use Argo CD, I'm going to use it with GitOps. So I'm always going to control and configuring it from the CLI. Sorry, from the Git repo, from the YAML. And then I will use standard kubectl commands. That's how I use it. So I only use the Argo CD command line tool for sort of show and tell, or maybe setting it up in a quick fashion just for demo purposes. But I've never done that in production. And I don't, since I use Argo CD specifically for GitOps, I don't want to use the command line, because the command line means that I have to have a tool on my machine and I maybe am changing something in Argo without it being in Git, which is the whole point of GitOps, is I want these things recorded. I want these changes controlled by Git. So that's how I use it. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be the best person for the Argo CD command line tool. I have a whole course on Argo CD, and I largely avoid the command line tool because for teams implementing it, they don't really need that. We're going to install it with a kubectl or a Helm chart. We're going to run kubectl and apply the YAML from Git. We're going to tell it in that YAML where to go on GitHub or GitLab to go get the changes and to watch for webhooks and changes there. So I don't really need its command line tool. In fact, I think there's occasions where I've not even had it installed, the command line tool, and I'm running it on a remote server cluster. So I don't know. Sorry if that doesn't help you a lot. Yeah, Eric's got a good comment about the OS is becoming less and less important unless you have a subscription with Red Hat, which they would disagree with. But I agree. I think that since I'm doing less and less on the host, I care more about the low-level stuff of the host. I care less about the package manager of the host. I care more about like drivers, mount points, network performance tweaks, that sort of stuff on the host. And then just being able to run the latest container D engine and the Kubernetes tools, right? That's what I really focus on. So in the cloud, if you were to come to me today and you had an organization and you said, we want to use Kubernetes on the cloud, I would say, great. You're going to use Fargate. You're going to use something where you never need to know what OS is installed or maintain the OS at all. So to me, I think that's kind of the goal of anyone in DevOps, is that we're trying to move away from lower level abstractions so we can work on the higher ones. That's why we have the cloud, because we got tired of buying servers and racking them and buying networking switches. That was what I did 20 years ago. Heck, I was doing that almost a decade ago. So that's why we have the cloud. That removed an abstraction: power, infrastructure, hardware, network configurations, internet access. That was all removed from our view for cloud. The next abstraction is removing the actual OS, removing the need for SSHing into machines. And that is what I would have every Kubernetes user using, unless they're on-prem. And obviously you can't get out of that. If you have your own data center, you're kind of stuck. NewArt47 says, is Docker considered a good option for HA proxy to load balance for high availability zones? Yes. Anything you can do on the host, you can do in Docker. There's a few weird tools that might not like some Docker networking functionality, because Docker networking uses virtual Ethernet interfaces and it adds IP table rules and it does some natting. And so there's packet manipulation there that might affect super high-end performance. I rarely see that with teams. It's very few teams that are needing, my answer to that is always just go get a server with a 10 gigabit NIC. It's not that expensive. Like, just get the 10 gigabit NIC and now you have 10 times the performance and you probably have enough CPUs to handle the load. So if you can't do that, then and you're nervous about that, and I would say 1 out of 100 teams I talk to, this is an issue. If you're going to use Docker, which I definitely would recommend, it makes deploying HA proxy easier, it makes maintaining the versions easier, it just makes everything easier. Then what I would do is I would run the HA proxy with the host parameter for network, so -- network host, which disables all of that stuff inside of Docker for swapping out the IP. If you're dealing with proxies and you're using things like you want to do logs for incoming traffic, or if you want to pass the proper IP address to the backend system so that it can log it. Virtual networks and stuff and containers can make that a little more challenging. And there's ways around it. We've got headers and HTTP, but one of the things you can do is you just make sure that when you're deploying it on Docker, if you -- host equals network, that disables that Docker virtual networking, and it basically, from a networking perspective, is just like HA proxy was running on the host OS directly without a container. But other than that, HA proxy, absolutely. I used to use HA proxy all the time. I actually deployed it for a global content video network, and for a company that has the word Flix in their name, and that worked really well. I actually liked HA proxy in that case more than Nginx. It had, in terms of the open source versions, not the enterprise versions. But the open source version of HA proxy had more statistics built in, more data metrics that I could track, which mattered in that case. So I don't know if that's still true today, because this was probably 7-8 years ago. But I really enjoyed HA proxy at the time. Yeah. Good question. Stern, Sergey, you go. Stern. So if you don't have a centralized logging for Kubernetes or Docker, and you should, if you're in production, put those logs somewhere else so that they don't go down with the server and that they are collected with all the other servers in a single searchable indexed thing. But if you can't do that, and you're maybe just on your own little cluster, maybe it's just a hobby cluster, that's all fine. Go over to GitHub and get Stern. So Stern, now I have to admit, the kube control command line has gotten much better over the years in terms of logs and the features of logging. But Stern is still pretty great. It's still a little bit easier and still works. So it's a separate command line tool. One of the things I like about it is it's not only helping with colors and date times and stuff like that, but it will help me not have to type the exact object I need to get the logs for. It's a little more forgiving when you're looking up a resource and you can just say the deployment or say the service or something like that, and it'll just it tends to figure it out. I don't know all the rules exactly of how and when it does and doesn't work, but I just know that it's a little bit more generous in its ability to find the right resource for me. Anyway, it's got tons of options in there, but you can go check out Stern. Thank you so much. See? We got helpful people in the chat. You don't even need me here. FluentBit. Also, Moz is talking about FluentBit. That is my go-to for shooting log. If I need to manipulate logs and send them off, FluentBit is my jam. That's my favorite. Performs great, works great. Config is relatively easy to understand. Raj is asking if there are any new videos coming to the Kubernetes mastery course. So there is a plan to add more videos. I don't know when those videos will be added because right now I'm working on Docker mastery. We just shipped a whole bunch of updates last quarter, so a couple months in August we shipped that, and I'm working on new sections for advanced Dockerfile stuff for Docker mastery. Then after that is finished and released, I expect for that to happen this year, but no promises. Again, I make them the best I can, and then I ship them, so I don't really have a deadline. And then the expectation is to go to the other courses, which the Kubernetes course needs some updates. The Node.js course for Docker needs some updates, especially around Compose, because Compose has changed so much in the last 3-4 years, and some of those videos are like 3 or 4 years old. So stay tuned. If you're on my newsletter, whenever I ship new major updates, Bret.news, you can go over here. If you're on the newsletter, you'll get those updates. You also get updates from Udemy in the announcements in an email. But if you don't see those, just make sure you read my newsletter, because I post any major course updates like that. For example, this summer, I updated a whole bunch of the Kubernetes videos in Docker Mastery for the latest changes. So any of the command line changes, that all went in there. So great question. Thanks for asking. And thanks for being a student. I really appreciate it. That's the reason I do these live streams every month. It's because you awesome people buy my courses. Yeah, SciTech saying Datadog logging is awesome. It's funny, going back to that HA proxy situation, the HA proxy was being monitored through Datadog, and Datadog's ability to know HA proxy was just so much. I mean, this was a long time ago, but it was so great. I just loved it. It just worked. It gave me all the data I needed, and I had giant dashboards. It's the kind of dashboard I set up in Datadog that I wanted to take a picture of it and brag about it. And then I wanted to put it on a monitor on the wall because it just looked awesome. Want to contribute to open source, not sure how. Any advice? So I had a recent episode. I'm going to say Jayanta. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Jayanta, if you go to my channel, don't leave this video, but when this video is over, if you go into live and you scroll back, one of our recent episodes, contribute to open source. Oh, you can't see it right there. Contribute to open source. That episode with Brian Douglas is all about open sourced. Open sourced.pizza. And that website is not maybe necessarily the place you would go to find your very first, like, how do I use GitHub kind of approach. If you want to use open source, it's open source lives on GitHub. So you just probably should look up GitHub tutorial if you don't know GitHub. And there's probably GitHub getting started. I know they have a couple of websites on GitHub. Quick start. Setting up Git. There's learning Git and then there's learning GitHub. So they have a lot of stuff there. I know they have like lesson plans, and you just kind of search around, but look on github.com. Once you've got Git down, once you've got GitHub down, then it's all about finding something you're interested in. What are you interested in? What are you passionate about? Are you wanting to run your own web server, your own web blog? Are you wanting to run a Twitter clone? Are you wanting to learn how to host video and serve it off a web server? Like, whatever you're into, you go find those projects and those tools. You use them, and then you'll probably learn a lot about it by using it. And that's when you can start working on the open source. I never recommend you go and just pick the most popular open source projects or the easiest open source projects, because you're not going to keep your interest long enough to really be of any help. So for me, for my example, my website is, I've been running it on ghost.org. It's an open source website and blog system. It does newsletters. It's kind of like WordPress, only it's newer and written in Node.js. So I like it. And they have a great team, fully open source. And if I'm going to contribute to open source and I don't have anything else, well, I want my own website. I write my own articles on my website. I change the theme and configure the theme and learn HTML on my website. So I would probably just contribute to them, because that's the thing I know, and I know what I want. I know the features I wish it had, and I can probably help other people with it. So, and open source doesn't just mean coding, right? You can go into the GitHub issues, you can find those things and answer other people's questions. You can improve documentation for the tools you're trying to use, and if the documentation was confusing, you can probably help them with that. Every project's different, but if you go over to OpenSauced, you can fill out a profile, you can explore some projects, and this is the trick, right? Like find hot repositories to contribute to today. This is pretty exciting stuff Brian's doing this year. I learned about open source, and this is a great platform. So if you're working at all in open source and you're contributing it all to open source, you should be on here. One of the goals is to make what you're doing in open source more available or more easier to discover for potential employers. So that way you can get hired to do open source. And so this is going to help promote and show your work rather than just a bunch of green dots like we have on the histogram in GitHub. So it gives you little cards, little things you can share. It's a pretty cool idea. I'm really wishing Brian and the team success on this. But one of the things is you can find hot repositories. And, Node.js is probably a hot repository. Think of any front-end view is probably a hot open source repository. But I don't use those tools. I don't know those tools. So those wouldn't be a right fit for me. I think it really has to come down to a community that you are interested in just not being involved in for the sake of being involved, but you actually want to use it. I use a new platform for my slides, and I make slides from Markdown. And so I wanted to contribute to that tool because I used it and I was learning it. So anyway, get off my soapbox about open source. So hopefully that helps you. By the way, that if you're curious about the slide tool, sli.dev. So this is the one I've been using lately, and I'm digging it. I've used 4 or 5 of these different Markdown makers, and this one's based on Vue, I think, and I like it. There's pros and cons to all of them. It has pros and cons. It has a VS Code plugin. It has a bunch of fancy tools for the presenter. I can actually sync slides with the people watching. There's all sorts of stuff in here that I don't use that's pretty slick, but it looks good. By the way, speaking of jobs, did you know Docker is hiring? Docker, if you're an engineer, or even if you're not, they have a bunch of careers on their website. They have over 20 engineering jobs currently available. You could be the next person to add a new command to the Docker command line. That's the runtime CLI team in Europe. They're looking for European full-time workers to work on the desktop platform, to work on the cloud platform, the builder, the Docker build. Can you imagine how many millions of people would use your code if you were working at Docker and you're working on the build or runtime engine, the networking, cloud dev? There's US, there's Canada, there's Mexico, all these teams across the world. So, and it's not just engineering; they have other jobs too. If you're someone who's maybe traditional IT, or maybe you're more on the IT pro side or DevOps side, not a full-on programming engineer, then there are some other jobs here probably you should look at. Solutions architects, some product people, product managers, product design. Okay. All kinds of jobs. All departments. 44 job openings right now at one company. So go check that out in case you're looking for a job and you want to work on some cool open source. Raj is like, yes, I love the colors. Yes, colors matter. Does Docker logging driver play nice with NFS? Didn't find much info about this approach. Purin, I would not do that. I'm assuming what you mean is the logs write to NFS. I wouldn't do that. Now, what you could do is, if you wanted to stay pure Linux and you didn't want a centralized logging solution like Loki or any number of other logging solutions for containers, you can use the systemd or the journald drivers, and you could shoot these logs to a service over the network. Just going to bring up my iTerm here real quick. Let's see. Or maybe I just bring up my VS Code. Sorry, I didn't have this window ready. All right. Yes, we're working. If you look at Docker info for the drivers, you can see a list of all these log drivers. So Docker engine out of the box, you can tell each container or the whole daemon from the daemon configuration, you can give it all these different types of drivers that are built in, and you could have a remote system like syslog running on another host. And I believe that would provide, like journald, I believe all of these provide TCP abilities. I'm not an expert in that, but that's what I would do. I would not store logs in files on a centralized server, because then it just doesn't really scale. So either just keep it on the host if you don't care, if you're just, if you're okay with if the system goes down, the logs get lost, if you're fine with that, or consider one of these many other solutions, including third-party tools like Splunk, log entries, cloud, SaaS and cloud tools like AWS, GCP, and then FluentD may have FluentD. Like, there's obviously JSON file which allows you to store, but then you have to parse it, right? So I don't know if FluentD allows what ways it has for sending elsewhere, but I've just never seen it. I've never seen a production system where someone is storing logs on a remote system. So if you're searching the internet, ProRen, and you're not finding anything on NFS, that's probably because you shouldn't do it, because no one else is. And you probably, even though it's possible, it may be technically possible, but do you want to do that? Do you want to be the only person in the world using that? And there's probably a reason everyone else has chosen something else. If you're looking for a fun project and you're okay with a centralized solution that requires storage and setup in its own containers, look up Grafana's Loki. The Loki project over here. I'll just go to the website. It's a little easier to look at. And that's one that a lot of people jump onto when they're getting into self-hosting their own centralized logging. I am personally not a fan of self-hosting my own centralized logging. It's work. It requires storage. It will need backups. That's effort. I'd much rather ship it to the internet. So there's so many logging solutions on the internet that all support Docker. They're endless. Every cloud has one. There's third-party tools. This website has a cloud version. Everybody has a cloud version. Datadog, like you name it. They're all various price points, various feature sets. I'd rather pay for that than mess with them locally on my servers or have to manage the logging solution. I have kind of the same opinion about monitoring. I'd rather not run my own monitoring solution. I like the idea of the Grafana cloud only because the Grafana, let's go over here to cloud. I like this idea and I support this idea because it is open source that I can run myself and or I can run it in their SaaS, their cloud platform, and pay them. I can do both. I can have part here, part there, and it's all the same tools. It's all the same configurations. It's all the same dashboard configs. So I get this benefit of being able to, in small cases, maybe on test systems I don't care about, I'm running it locally. I don't have to have a redundant setup. I'm not backing it up. I just run it. And then for the production stuff, I can use a highly available cloud service just for those production servers to lower the cost. And they have ways of all that working together. So that's what I would do if it was me. and I had a few bucks. If I have no bucks, if it's a home lab, download Loki, download Prometheus, get the Helm charts for these things, install them on Kubernetes or on Compose. I'm sure someone's got a Compose set up if you're on just Docker. If you just want to use the Docker engine, you could probably do that as well. That's a great question, great discussion. But I definitely wouldn't do the NFS. And it's okay that you asked. It's okay. It's okay that you asked. You can do that. I'm not making fun of you. But NFS, no, I wouldn't do NFS. It's a great question. I would have assumed the same thing, honestly. Only back in my Windows days, it would have been SIFs, right? Or Samba, not NFS. Oh, Conrad's, yes, Hacktoberfest. I totally forgot. I'm not doing my job. I'm quitting. I don't know. What am I doing here? I did not think about the fact that October. I have the t-shirts. I swear I've used a t-shirt before. All right. 10th year. And I was so busy. I'm busy. I got I just left a conference. I got 2 more in 2 weeks. Next week, I'm in a conference. Okay. Enough excuses. So Hacktoberfest, for those of you that are new to open source, this is meant to help you get involved. They do lots of things. So it may be too late for you to get like free swag because they have to limit that because this has gotten so huge. But, and I love that little logo. They got the 8-bit. I'm digging it. So this and the pizza. Did I put the pizza up already? I'm putting the pizza up again. So you want open sourced and you want Hacktoberfest. Thank you so much, Conrad. Sorry I didn't see that earlier. Yeah. What days to have your lessons so I join all the time? Edjo. I'm going to call you Edjo. Edjo Catcher. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Every Thursday, right now, this time, every week. It's when I'm here. We have guests. I have hosts. I have co-hosts. We have friends. Today, it's just me. Once a month, I take a break from all my friends that I miss and all the new people I'm meeting, and it's just you and me, jamming on the internet. Docker Log Driver has a nice feature which allows you to forward container logs to syslog server. It really saved me lots of time when integrating container logs with SIEM. Is that how you say it? SIEM? Security tools, essentially. So that's cool that someone's actually done it because I had done syslogd. I'm old. 2001. 2002. I was running my own ISP. Short little story. Hey, did you know that one of the 7 businesses I've ran over the last 20 years, one of them was a neighborhood ISP. I lived in Northern Virginia, United States, and we didn't have high-speed cable internet. It was all dial-up and crappy satellite, which was horrible, and ISDN, which was also horrible. I wanted a T1, which a T1 today is a joke. A T1 today would be the slowest internet other than dial-up probably anymore. I know there's some people in really remote areas that have really horrible internet, especially in the United States. But back then, an entire region of communities didn't have high-speed internet. So I bought a T1. I had to sign a year agreement to get it installed. If you didn't know, a T1 runs over regular phone lines. It's 1.5 megabits per second and not that fast. Like your phone with 1 bar can get a better, faster signal nowadays. But it was lightning fast in 2001. So I bought it. It was $600 a month to get this because it was a commercial. They had to do a special install. I had to get a Cisco device because that's the only way you could connect a T1 was with a Cisco device or something very enterprisey and expensive. And I put this all in my basement. And then I joined something called the DC Capital Wireless Community. And this was back when we didn't even have wireless built in laptops. We had to put it in, those of you that were around, PCM CIA cards. Remember those suckers? Yeah. PCM CIA. By the way, this was back when USB was new. Okay, so in case you didn't know what a PCM CIA card was, this is how we got extra devices in our laptops before we had USB as a standard. So you could get wireless modems for cellular data if you were a hotshot. You could get memory cards. You could have flash, compact flash, or various, SD card readers, and this little slot in the side of your laptop. If you weren't around back then, this is how we did it. So this is how I got Wi-Fi. So I'd slide this little Wi-Fi. We got 802.11b, which was amazing. B, it was so fast. And then we got G. Of course, those are really slow and old protocols, but we did all this stuff, right? So I put wireless antennas on my roof, stuck them out my windows to radiate. I learned all about wireless signals. I learned all about the different types of antennas. So you have square antennas that are directional, you have semi-directional, you have omnidirectional, that's a pole. Omnidirectional antennas, so that's whenever you see a pole, literally a stick in the air, that means it sends a signal everywhere in all directions, not up or down usually, but around you horizontally. And so I did all this. I spent thousands of dollars. And then I went to every one of the neighbors within wireless distance. So I walked around with my laptop, found every neighbor, hundreds of houses, and I got enough of them to sign up at, I think the cheapest plan was like $15 or $10 a month for a super little amount of bandwidth. And I did all this to pay for my T1. And the secret, you want to know the secret? They didn't really use a lot of internet back then. So I was really getting my own T1, and other people were paying for it. Yeah, it was work. I even set up a mail server for them. I even was running, what was the name of that webmail client? There was this great open source webmail client 20 years ago. Anyway, I was doing all this work just to pay for my T1 line so I could work from home in 2001, 2002, like this time frame, back when nobody had high-speed internet. So my neighbors were all very excited, and I would show them the hardware they had to get. And then we would flash their Wi-Fi router with WRT stuff, which is open source, OpenWRT, I think is what it was called. And then they would connect to me over this 802.11b connection. And that was even very slow. And even we had too many signals and too much traffic, but it still was faster than dial-up. And that was 3 years of my life. It was a lot of fun. Squirrel. That is a story. That is a story that I'm telling. It's my channel. My channel today. I'm telling my stories. Opinions on Elastic. Elastic's fine. I'm not an expert. If you're talking about the Elastic logging solution, used to be known as ELK, right? That's all fine. I don't see as many people purely focused on open source picking those solutions, and I'm not sure why. Maybe one of you knows. Most people tend to go the other way to Prometheus and Loki. I don't see a lot of ELK setups like I used to 5-7 years ago. Yes, Wi-Fi was a thing. We didn't even have security. I think it was, we weren't using WPA. It was the older, we didn't even have WPA 1, much less WPA 2. We had the older insecure protocol, and people technically could hack and get on my network. But in case you're curious about my former life, before being the DevOps Docker guy, I still have my old website up. Fishbrains.com. You're going to love it. Look at that guy. Look at that guy. I can't even zoom in on that photo. Look at that beardless, wonderful young man. And look at that picture of code plus Linux shell plus Windows Hyper-V. This was me basically claiming that I did all the OSs. I did all the things. So way back here, you can actually see my logging. We called it web logging before it was called a blog, going all the way back to 1999 here. Okay. And I was really into FreeBSD. Look at that date, 2003. You didn't even know what the internet was in 2003. And I was killing it out here, giving you tutorials on DummyNet setup, which this is actually really cool. FreeBSD had this great early days ability for me to configure inputs and outputs based on MAC address and IP addresses. So I could go in and tell each one of my neighbors, based on how much they paid me, how fast their internet can be. 128 kilobits? Okay, you pay this much. Half a megabyte? You pay this much. And the dummy net and all this other stuff would help me control their speed by slowing down their packets, essentially. Ran it all on a single server. It was actually old Dell PCs that were enterprise Dell PCs that were beige and ugly, but they were slim. And I could stack them up. And I had a whole stack of like 8 desktop machines, probably running Pentium 2s or Pentium 3s. Anyway, if you want to blast from the past, there's a 20-year-old blog post for me. In case you didn't think I was old enough. I was also a big Windows guy, so you see all sorts of Windows posts. Pinging Windows 2008 with the firewall on. See, I mean, we didn't have any of the socials. The only social we had back then was Facebook. So, you can tell that migrating over the years wasn't kind on ASCII characters. But yeah, I was doing key management service for Vista and Server 2008. I mean, killer content, people. Why is this not getting more hits? But if you scroll all the way back, this is kind of my fun thing. Every once in a while I go back here. This is when I left the United States military. And I was going to Italy for 6 months. And I posted on my blog. Again, weblog. We did not call it blogs back then. Posted on my weblog. And this wasn't my oldest post. It's just the oldest one that made it through the transition from... So I was literally writing HTML from scratch in the 90s because there was no such thing as WordPress. We didn't have WordPress. And then I went to WordPress, and then I went to Ghost, and then I think I changed probably 3 or 4 other things over time. So in the conversion process, I eventually lost everything other than this. But I was basically saying, this is the ship I'm going to be on. I'm going to be in Italy. I'm going through Spain. My first time living in Europe. And I'm excited to get back because I just finished my MCSE, which back then was sort of the coup de grace of Microsoft certifications. That was the killer one. Anyway, it's always kind of fun to go back to your past and see what you did way back in the day. I was talking about X server in 2002. Who was doing that? Just old people. That's what it was. Old people. That's what we were back then. We were young. We had time. We had weekends. We played with this stuff on the weekends. I had a TiVo. All right. Give me some questions, people. I'm going to wrap this up if you don't give me some good questions. Moz used Compact Flash to install the bootloader or boot up embedded system devices in 2008. It was always a chance. The bootloading things, I mean, it's not that easier nowadays, but at least we have USB. Back when we didn't have USB, it was challenging to get the floppy formatted just right so that it would boot from the floppy and then to tell the BIOS that this is the device to boot from and then to get that on the hard drive and to format the hard drive from the floppy. That was a lot of work back then. Eric still has a TiVo. Full confession. Full confession. Is that a joke? TiVos, man, they had it. They were a classic case of like they owned the market. Everyone I knew had a TiVo. Everyone that was into tech had a TiVo. I had 3 TiVos. And then it just streaming killed it, and they couldn't innovate fast enough to be useful in a streaming world. They literally had a software-based desktop device that could have been the streaming home for everything. It could have had all the streaming stuff. But now we have Rokus and Fire Sticks and Apple TVs. So sorry, TiVo. You had it. You had the lead, and that's called the innovator's dilemma. You can look that up on Wikipedia. That's why they lost. Don't want to rob our current business of recording cable TV in order to start the new business of streaming. And they did have some streaming early on. It was really hokey. I had some of that stuff, like you could stream radio stations and Shoutcast. It really whips the llama's ass. That was a Winamp, in case you were a Winamp person. Hey, while we're talking about old tech, let's just talk about this fantastic Discord we live in. Did you know about my Discord? It's right over there. It's right over there because my screen changed. DevOps fan. Go join the Discord. And in there, some of my favorite channels, including Retro Tech, where we go back in time and you can learn about all the things that were on the internet before you were born. Just recently, this week, we were talking about Airwolf, Street Hawk. I love Street Hawk and Airwolf. And then Megaforce, one of my favorite 80s movies of all time. I mean, who demonetized? All right, people, I'm going to wrap this up. We've been here for an hour and 10 minutes. Oh, wait, Chris has got a question. It looks legit. It looks legit. I'm trying to get into K8s, working on my CKA. Nice. I want to build a cluster using kubeadmin, but I want to automate the deployment. Any tips? Automate kubeadmin? Well, when you say automate, I'm not sure, like, are you not wanting to run kubeadmin directly? Are you wanting something else to run kubeadmin? Legit question. I only say that because there are other tools that under the hood use kubeadmin and make it a little easier. So for example, one that I like, KURL.sh, KURL.sh. This is a wonderful open source project maintained by Replicated, who have been on this show last year, I believe. And KURL allows you, so I can say, yeah, I want this version of kubeadmin. I don't want to use the Docker because we don't use that in Kubernetes much anymore, even though you can totally do it. But we're going to use Containerd. I want to use the Flannel networking plugin, the CNI plugin. I want to use Contour as my ingress. They used to have more options, but they tend to fade in and out options over time. Contour is a great ingress option. I've also had Contour on the show. And then maybe I want some administration tooling. I could use one of those options. I could shoot my logs somewhere, so let me auto install the FluentD and set that up. This is one of their other tools for actually managing third-party applications, but we're not going to use that because that's more the app level, not the cluster level. What about storage? Well, I can use Rook or MinIO. I'm going to choose Rook. And then if you want a custom PVC provider, you can use EBS rather, so it emulates the EBS from AWS, or I can use Longhorn. I don't know why they deprecated Longhorn, but I thought that was going well. And then I want to do some monitoring, Prometheus. Oh yeah, I definitely want Cert Manager to manage all my certs. I'm going to install my own registry. I don't know if I need that. I don't think I need the registry. And then I want to do backups with an open source backup tool called Valero. And then what I get is I have all this YAML that defines the version. So if I wanted to make this configurable, I could download this YAML, or I could just run this command. So it gives me this unique command, and when I run that command on a server, it will install based on all of that configuration I just gave it. Or I can even do an air gap installer, where if I don't have the internet, I can download a bundle that allows me to run it on a server. This is a really cool option that a lot of people don't know about. Completely open source. And all the tools in it are completely open source. So it's open source deploying open source. And it wraps kubeadmin and all of the options and configuration you might use in kubeadmin. So that might be an option for you if you're looking to simplify kubeadmin, but also make it flexible enough that you could technically customize it. So you can even go in here and change some of the settings for kubeadmin specifically if you don't want to use the defaults. And all this stuff that you change, you'll see it actually goes into this YAML that is fed into KURL. Anyway, pretty slick, I think. Pretty slick. Book a TiVo discussion for KubeCon. Late night KubeCon TiVo discussions. They're the worst. They're the worst. You want a TiVo? Chris, hopefully that helped you a little bit. How to practice Docker effectively? Use it. Just use it and don't come up with contrived examples. Like, are you a developer? Are you getting into DevOps? Like, what are you doing? Use Docker for everything. Force yourself to not install command line tools. Force yourself to use Docker to run those command line tools. or to do as much as you can in Docker. That will, if you force yourself to just use it for whatever else you're going to do. You want to set up a web server locally, like Ghost, which is my blog is on Ghost, ghost.org. Don't do it by installing their command line tool. Do it by running their container from Docker Hub. Make it your own compose file to run that thing locally with a Docker compose up command. So that's to me the best way, because if you're using it for your real work day to day, it will be frustrating at first. It'll be a little slower, but you're going to force yourself to learn it because you have to, right? And then you're not setting up just things that you don't care about that may or may not work right because you're not really using it. I find that when you're really using a tool, you end up learning it way faster and way deeper than even sometimes courses can teach you, because you're going to learn all those little options, the dash options on the end. And you're going to learn a lot of that stuff that is applicable to your use case. And even in my 21-hour course, I can't give you every use case possible for how to use Docker. So I just say, whatever you're doing today, do it in Docker. Bash script to deploy everything to the nodes, container runtime, CNI, static IP. Well, so if you had a bash script, so if you could use that KURL and that KURL.sh, and then you would run that, wrap that in a bash script that would actually SSH into the nodes and then run it, because it has to be, that install has to be run, as far as I know, that install utility has to be run on the node. But that KURL install for each node is its own bash script. So you could just run that command remotely through SSH. And if you didn't know about, is it PSSH? Yeah, PSSH. Look up the utility PSSH, which allows you to run the same or run multiple SSH commands in multiple servers in parallel. So whereas SSH can allow you to run a script in one machine, one connection at a time, one command at a time, PSSH is how some of us who automate a lot of infrastructure and we just need bash shells, we don't need anything Terraform, we're not using the cloud, we're just using our own real machines. PSSH is something that I learned from Jerome Pedizzoni. Hello, Jerome, of former Docker fame. He clued me in with his own scripts on how to use PSSH for running the same command across a series of IP addresses. So you could do that. You could check that out. What's new in Docker bind mounting and how to use it? So Conrad, I would say I'm not aware of anything new in specifically Docker run bind mounting. What I think is new is that Docker Compose Watch, which I've talked about on this channel. I actually have a YouTube short on it as well. Docker Compose Watch will use tooling to sync files into my container. And so they have Compose Watch versus bind mounts as a comparison. Because for me, most of my code bind mounts are no longer needed. Hey, Chris, come back next week. And we're also in join the DevOps server. If you come back on Thursdays, any live stream on Thursdays, and not everyone is Q&A. So join the DevOps fan server. You'll be in Discord. You can also see when I'm going to be live on the newsletter and who the guests are going to be and whether or not we're going to have a Q&A like this one. So yeah, so Conrad, the Compose Watch. What I do now, and my example, I actually did this at DockerCon. So when my DockerCon node talk comes out, let me see, Node Rocks. So in here, my new Compose file. Notice the new file name, compose.yaml. It's their new preferred file name for Docker Compose. They're just calling it Compose now, I guess. But in here, this is what, for a Node.js, for example, I tell it to sync all of my, first off, we got this brand new section called watch, or sorry, develop. And under develop, there's a watch. And I actually say, if these files, by the way, notice the lack of volumes, right? And so what I say is, if I change the package JSON or the package lock, then rebuild the image and restart the container. If, it's rebuild. If I change any of my source code files, the sync means copy them into the container from the host. So it avoids the bind mount. Now, why do you care about avoiding bind mount? Bind mounts are great if you're on Linux. If you're on WSL2 and your code is in WSL2 on Windows, it's great. But across OSs, it's not great. The performance has always been not awesome. And as your projects grow, if you go beyond examples and you go to big production projects, you will have problems with node modules. NPM install is going to be slow, right? So for years, we've all come up with ways to work around it. I do this thing where I mount volume and then I install the node modules there instead of bind mounting it. And then I mount the code in, but then I volume the directory on top of it. There's all these weird techniques to avoid this performance problem. But the performance problem was from the fact that locally on our machine, it's a different use case than servers. We might want to bind mount on servers, and that's fine because it's the same file system, so there's no performance problems. But on our local system, we're usually running something in Linux, but we're on a Mac or a Windows machine, right? So we got to do it. And this problem is already getting new features. This is already outdated as of, this file isn't even a month old. And this is already outdated because they now just shipped a feature, and I'm not sure if it's in the latest version of Docker Desktop yet, but we're probably a week away, if not already. But you can now put sync plus reboot or sync plus restart. So this means that if it syncs in files, I don't have to use nodemon anymore. So if it syncs in the file because it sees a change in my source code, it will automatically restart the container because a lot of stuff in Node, like JavaScript files that Node is running, if you change that JavaScript file, Node has to hup. It has to restart, essentially, to see those changes. Not true if it's serving static content, but for the code, the Node.js code itself, your TypeScript, whatever. And so you can do this here. Now, if I was doing TypeScript, obviously I'd have to do things like run some sort of TypeScript monitor locally and then probably have this monitoring the build directory, which is outputting the JavaScript. Or I could maybe do it in the container if I wanted to run nodemon in the container. There's a lot you can still do here. A lot of those rules don't change. It's just very basic. Either rebuild, sync files, or sync and restart. Now, which is the latest one. I think the action is literally sync plus symbol restart. If I go over to the GitHub.docker compose, and this is docker/compose, their repo. And the way I know all this stuff is I monitor their, I go up here and, well, the screen's too big, but I could go up there and I monitor for releases. And then I get an email every time they got a new release. And yes, it's restart. It's restart. So sync plus restart is the new feature, which in a lot of simple cases helps me avoid needing nodemon or web dev server or any sort of thing that will restart my container. Yeah, Nubuo, going back to the Longhorn discussion. Yeah, I don't know why they took Longhorn out. They just did. I don't know why they did. Yeah, you're not sure if you want to spin up kubeadmin or use cloud for compute. Yeah, when you can run containers in a dozen different ways on each cloud, and only a few of those ways require that you even SSH into a server, a lot of us nowadays are looking for ways to avoid even managing the servers themselves. But if you want to use kubeadmin and set it up yourself, if you're learning or if you're just running a hobby at home, I would recommend that. Like if you're going to hobby, play with the stuff you want to play with, right? That's the point of having a hobby lab. Home lab. Eric is bringing back a topic we were talking about earlier. If you were on here at the beginning of the stream, Eric helps run does run. I didn't actually see that. I don't know why I missed that one. A a book club, and they're going through Chad KuRL's CKA book, which we had him on the show earlier this year. Yeah, so Chris, come back when you have more time. Hey, I bought your course a while back, and it helped me out a lot. Thanks, Chris. I'm glad it did. What about Docker Registry? Yuri is asking, what about Docker Registry for on-prem? What tool would you recommend? Is there any good open source solutions? Yes, I would use Helm. I'm sorry, not Helm. Harbor. Not Harbor Freight. No, I don't want the demo. Come on. Harbor. It has got a ton of features. I've seen it used in enterprises and small companies. If you have to run your own locally on your local machine, or on your local servers, I would start there. It's not the only option. There are lots of ones out there, but this is fully open source, well supported, a part of the CNCF community. So it's got lots of partners. It's got lots of support. So I would use that. Oh, thanks, New. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's too bad about Longhorn. Stability, performance, and lack of community support. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, Red Hat puts out lots of new ideas. Not Red Hat. Rancher. What a mistake. Rancher puts out lots of good open source, and they see if it sticks, and it doesn't always stick. So I don't know if Longhorn's maybe, because there's no maybe commercial product behind it. I don't know. I'm not sure the reason behind that, but that's too bad. Storage is hard. Storage is hard. Yeah, cool. All right, everyone. Next week, I'm going to be gone to a conference, but I'm still going to have something for you. We're probably going to do a premiere, which means YouTube will launch a pre-recorded video at the same time, and I'll be in chat, so we can chit-chat in the chat, but I'll have something pre-recorded because I will be at conferences for the next 2 weeks, first in Austin, and then in KubeCon, Chicago. Stay tuned because I'll be live streaming from there, assuming the internet gods allow us to do that. Nirmal and I will be streaming all the things from KubeCon. We'll probably have some friends hanging out with us, and that'll be a good time. That's in 2 weeks. Then after that, we've got Dagger. Solomon Hykes, the creator of Docker, the founder of Docker, is going to be on talking about his new startup that's not so new anymore because it's been around a while, Dagger.io. We're going to talk about what Dagger is today, their sort of path to figuring out how to help people in CI and allow you to have a CI tool that works everywhere on any platform, local, remote, you name it, and then write your CI in your own preferred languages. So we're going to dive in. I'm going to learn a lot because I haven't checked out their latest releases, and I'm excited to hear about all the new stuff. So Solomon's going to be on, and we're going to have a great time there. Lots more shows coming up every Thursday for the rest of the year and beyond. We're going to be at episode 300 before I know it. So, and if you're going to be at KubeCon, reach out in the chat. Come to chat. We can definitely want to meet everyone in real life, and then we can take a selfie. Wouldn't that be fun? All right, everybody. See you next week or sooner if you chat in the DevOps fan server. As always, like and subscribe, all those socially things, and I appreciate you so much. See you next week.